This is just a small agenda for what I'll try to be talking about today. Basically, just want to have an open discussion with everybody here about what the next most effective, like life-saving measures are. And this is not just direction for the Safety Commission, it's just more an overall discussion of how to keep our sport safe as it's growing. So I guess this main title here is for big highlines and then the future direction for safety, the safety in general. So speaking specifically about the Safety Commission, what I was wondering is what the Safety Commission can do beyond what we've already done. So safety labels cover the major aspects of gear, or at least as we've seen them. Of course, they can evolve, and that's going to be an ongoing process with the Safety Commission. However, the commission itself has limited resources and manpower. So how does the Safety Commission address issues most effectively? And then how do we as a general Slackline community talk about safety going into the future? So one thing I wanted to talk about specifically here was big highlines. I think this is an area that a lot of people are beginning to explore and don't have maybe some of the required resources for being as safe as they could. So wind is obviously a big concern. It's caused a lot of issues. I think it's the #1 issue with regards to the Slackline accidents and incidents report. So, you know, that was something that Philip talked about. We already had that discussion, but obviously that one's pretty big up there. The Safety Commission is working on that. I think people are becoming more aware in the community about that as well. Another big thing to think about with big highlines is connectors. You know, there's many competing ideologies with connected or segmented highlines. So it presents additional points of failure. You know, having one big piece of webbing has been pretty safe, but once you separate that up into homemade connectors, sewn loops, things like that, that adds additional complexity and potential for problems. So one question is, should we start describing connections, like just identifying them and, you know, formally listing them just as a way to begin talking about it? Because when somebody says like an Eno split, we kind of know what it is, but it could involve many different like lengths of soft shackle. It can involve a specific way of twisting it. It can involve even a Dura-Vita loop inside the Eno split, like, you know, Balance Community's solution. So maybe just identifying and categorizing it so that we all understand what we're talking about when we say Eno split with the Vita loop or whatever. Maybe I think that's a good place to start. A big question is, should it be standardized? Can we even standardize it? At what point could it be standardized? I'm not sure that is worthwhile now, since it's such a nascent kind of development. But it's certainly something to think about, maybe to talk about, like how in the future it can be there. And Shane's asking what's considered big: over 200 meters, over 300 meters. For me, I don't know. It's like 100 meters is pretty big. It's considerable effort for somebody who's injured to get off the middle of a 100-meter line. Like, it's really difficult. Rescue becomes really difficult in situations where lines are over 100 or 150 meters. So I think when I talk about big, it's just the complexity of the issue. Lines with at least one connection is what Shane said might be considered big, but there have been plenty of lines that are like over 300 meters with no connections, especially in the past. And even going into the future, that's going to be the case. So I don't think the number of connectors can be a criteria for that. So actually, that brings me to another point I had, which with big highline concerns, is rescue. I think this is probably a death waiting to happen, basically. Like there's been some work regarding Highline rescue done by the Safety Commission, Stephen Walschlager, Kat, and Sarah. They've all put some effort into a Highline rescue working group. I think that's going to be an ongoing effort of the Safety Commission based purely on manpower. I think that's kind of stalled based on the fact that Stefan had some other conflicting work stuff. So it's very possible that a slackliner could get disabled in the middle of a really big highline, right? There's dislocated joints. If you dislocate a shoulder, it's going to become really hard to climb the leash, to roll back. It's going to be really difficult to stand up and walk with a dislocated shoulder. Concussions, if you get concussed in the middle of a big line, what happens? Like these, rescue becomes a big issue here. So anytime there's a loss of consciousness or a loss of ability to self-rescue, heart attacks and strokes are also a very common cause of death and morbidity. So that is really potential to happen in the middle of any high line. But if it happens particularly in the middle of a big high line, it becomes exceedingly difficult. Like what's the situation? What do we do there? Basically, how long before one of these situations happens in the middle of a big high line and somebody dies, right? So some remediation or some steps to remedy that. Some teams have experimented with like helicopter pickoff style rescue. I think that's really dependent on the local rescue team in situations like that. I don't think that's very applicable to most of the slacklining teams across the world. What's the alternative there? To send somebody over to the middle of a big line, drop them down, or pull them back up? We have kind of working understandings of what we would do if that were to happen. But the question with big high lines is, how much time do we have? If somebody falls off and is disabled and is hanging there, how much time before compartment syndrome or hanging syndrome or whatever happens? What's the best practices there that we can have? And then self-rescue is maybe something we should think about too. Like, what's the best practice for self-rescue on a big high line? Should we be advising people that get on a big high line to always bring some way to climb the leash if they have a dislocated shoulder? Obviously, most people on a big high line are going to have a hangover. It might be important to start identifying that in the Highline rescue group within the Safety Commission, and also just as a discussion within the community. Maybe we can talk about other best practices too. And sorry if I'm kind of dominating this discussion. I'm just going to go over each main point and then toss it back to you guys for questions. Failures on big high lines also presents an interesting issue. So if a segmented high line fails, what's the best practice? Obviously, if the highliner is still conscious, you'd want to get them off the line as soon as possible. But do they stand up and walk, or should they roll? It's going to be really difficult to roll, 500 meters, but still possible. So the bigger it is, actually kind of the easier it is to not roll back to the middle. But maybe we should have a little talk about that. And then, yeah. So do you guys have any thoughts on any of these big highline concerns? Bill Gates chimed in and says that we all have a helicopter. Cat Horton suggests rubber gloves and maybe bringing a grip with you. I think having a wafer or small style webbing grab is probably a really good idea on these big high lines, especially if they have any amount of sag, which makes it difficult to capture progress while rolling back to one anchor or the other. Prusik is useful. I always carry a Prusik with me on my hangover, but I actually have no idea how I would use it. Like I played around with it, but if I didn't have a functional arm, if I was dislocated, it might be really difficult to get back up. Paul Anton says the Rolex has a webbing blocker built in. I think that is something that's important going into the future to consider, to have some way of progress capture that's not extremely difficult. Philippine says that gloves are super helpful on high tech or thin webbing. Definitely agree there. I think maybe we should just start thinking about putting together a best practice list for like how to self-rescue on highlines. There's already a working group for highline rescue in general, but maybe putting out best practices there would be a good idea. The ISA could potentially formalize and publish some best practices, ones that you guys come up with. We can have a discussion on that if you like. What are your guys' thoughts on kind of formalizing a best practice document for highline rescue, for self-rescue on highlines and things like that? Do you think it would even work? Would people listen to the ISA on those matters? Feel free to chime in chat or just unmute your mic.
Yeah, hey, this is Shane from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yeah, I think, a lot of us are pretty familiar with a lot of rescue techniques, but it would be really good to have like a master sort of reference points on methods that are functional and for different situations, as an instructional material, but also as a reference material for people who are already familiar with such practices.
Yeah, I think giving guidance on self-rescue is a very good idea. It'll eliminate the need to perform a whole bunch of other sort of more team-based rescues, which are just inherently more risky once you start putting more people out and more maneuvers. If you can encourage the Slack population to upskill a little bit and get themselves out of trouble, that's a great idea.
Yeah, so Kat's been encouraging. I mean, I feel like, encouraging self-rescue and encouraging people to learn is really good. But Kat's been kind of encouraging communities to practice rescue techniques in general. And I know, a lot of communities have, but then also a lot of communities kind of don't bother ever trying it actively. A lot of people I know have ideas about rescue, but have never actually tested it. And when you test it, you realize it takes you like 20 minutes to do the thing. So what's a good method that we could like try and convince people to actually do their own self-rescue, right? Like maybe we could have some sort of prize where people send in videos of them trying to rescue themselves with one shoulder tied around their back on a highline or even in the park. Like maybe if we could do that, we could kind of get a little more visibility into it and convince people to actually try it and see how difficult it can be. Benjamin Clark mentions that he would listen to the ISA on Persico rescue. Laurent says that a 1 meter sling can be really useful. You can use it as a ladder or even a chest harness if you can't move to be able to stay in a sitting position. Yeah, a 1 meter sling in conjunction with a prusik can really help you climb a leash with just one arm and your legs to get back to the line. Kat says that having a rescue race would be a good thing to have, a rescue challenge, maybe a festival game around it. I think that would be a good place to start, actually, if a lot of festivals could maybe provide a kind of rest day activity or something where they just kind of do rescues. That would be pretty interesting. Or people self-rescue in order to get a t-shirt or a hangover or something. That would really probably get a lot of participation. Benjamin Clark says that, if that was one way to go, then we could see where all potential personal rescues go wrong, and that's really a point as well. Sarah Miner recommends 2 60-centimeter slings, girth hitched as a chest harness. I feel like that's more something you would do when you're performing a rescue rather than a self-rescue. But, because I just foresee a lot of slackliners not carrying that amount of sling on them while they're slacking. Lawrence suggests that we rescue with both feet and hands attached behind the back, what's known as the shibari rescue, shibari self-rescue. Usually you try and use the force to do that, so it's not really a slackline concern. Okay, I feel like that was kind of good discussion on that. I actually only have maybe 15 more minutes before I have to do some other work. We have maybe potentially one action item, which is to have a self-rescue challenge, or even just a rescue challenge in general. But all these points that I brought up are points to consider. Maybe you guys can think about it, since you all seem to be safety-minded. Think about how to address some of these points, what the resolution is, or even if there's no resolution to rescue on a big highline, at least it should be made very apparent the risks that are being taken, because nowadays you get a lot of less experienced people on big highlines, and they should just know that they're kind of out on their own if something happens in the middle of a big highline. Okay. The next topic, highline safety in general. I think we kind of just touched on social media highlighting of best practices. We've talked about some of these issues in the SAIR talk that happened earlier today. A question I had is, how do you suggest the best practice for just paying attention as a rigger? It seems like a lot of these issues happen then. I don't really have an answer for that. Philosophers throughout the years haven't had an answer for that. So you kind of just have to trust in the community, trust in people to save their own lives, right? Yeah, we can reiterate checking anchors and buddy check-in and all that, but yeah, how do we formalize that kind of thought and training? One concept I had with Highline in general is we need to continue to evangelize Highline rescue. We kind of talked about that. Maybe we can get more social media influence to get people to think about these issues. Kat Horton mentions to check out Lipsy, Anna, and Sarah's rescue video. She just posted a link to Instagram. Philip Queen says GGBY's anchor checkoff sheet is good for most festivals. I guess I wasn't too concerned with festivals so far. I see a lot of people rigging independently in the United States, but that's a good point. If you guys know of any festivals that are trying to start, it'd be good for them to follow best practices, some of which have been laid out by GGBY. I'm sure that it'd be pretty easy for people to find that information. If you contact anybody that has managed or helped manage GGBY, they're more than glad to share that information.
There's also plenty of that on the ISA website or on the data page to find.
Okay. Let's see, wanted to talk a little bit about long line safety. It hasn't really come up much except for that really big death that happened pretty recently. So I wanted to ask if you guys think there's a best practice for tying backups to metal anchors. Some things were mentioned in the SAIR discussion earlier. Using rope instead of webbing, since rope seems to have a better knotting characteristic. But then how much energy can be absorbed in rope? Maybe you need to wrap rope around multiple times. How feasible is that for most slackliners? Is it better to tie your back up in a way that redirects the force towards the ground rather than to a slackliner? So for instance, tying the rope somewhere low so that when it does get tensioned, it pulls the force down into the ground. I know a lot of trick liners think about that in particular with ratchets. Since there's so much energy in a trick line, that might be something to suggest. I feel like that needs a little more testing. The ISA will be adding some new testing procedures around like knotted webbing. We're going to do some tests on that, but if you guys have any ideas or any best practices there, I'd love to hear them. And then how do you protect web locks with no additional tie-in point? So usually we either just tie the back up to the shackle in that situation. And there haven't been that many shackle failures, but there's plenty of human error, which causes failures to like fully put the pin in on a shackle. So that's, you know, potentially an issue, especially if the web lock itself doesn't have any other way to tie a back up. I know most modern web locks have a little bigger connection point, but yeah, that's just something maybe we should think about producing a best practice for those things. And I know we do have some safety documents about how to safely back up your long line, but maybe it's something we need to revisit and see how effective we can make it within the community. Yeah. Any discussion on general highlining or long lining safety there? Laurent says that there's the technique with a knot in front of the web lock. I had thought about that too, like a barrel knot or something in front of the web lock. And Philip Queen mentions that having an answer for tight versus loose backups would be helpful. Yeah, I feel like most of the discussion on that has just been speculation. I mean, there's some way to think about it in terms of energy in that if you have a loose backup, the webbing has more time to accelerate your web lock. That's my personal view, but I feel like if we had solid tests on that, that would really be a way to move forward with a suggestion about how to secure that backup, rather than just saying you need a backup, like the specifics of it. Okay, I guess some other general thoughts on safety. Maybe we should compile some best practices from the Fail Fridays into one cohesive document or page. I feel like it's hard to find all the lessons from each of the Fail Friday posts in one place. So that might be a good way to do it. Yeah. And also, do you guys think it would be a good idea to partner with like social media personalities, mainly Ryan Jenks and How Not to Highline, to expose more common failures to a large community? I know a lot of people have come to me saying that they want to highline or get into it because they've been watching Ryan Jenks on YouTube and follow him religiously. So like this might be a good way to get more information out to the community rather than just the Facebook post, to partner with somebody who's really focused on lots of views. So something to consider. Anybody in the Safety Commission can, of course, chime in on our Discord channel. If you guys want to have your say in how the ISA Safety Commission operates, of course, you're welcome to join. Or just start the conversation, message me directly, have a open discussion in Slack chat or something. Any comments or further input, guys?
Did I get you correctly, Hai, that you were saying somebody like Ryan, for example, could expose common mistakes or like critique?
Well, I guess my idea might be we would, generate these fail Fridays and just ask him or Trickline Council or whoever has like a lot of people to mention it in one of the videos or something like that, just so that the information gets spread out there more widely. Because a lot of people, I've had contact from several people that know about how not to highline, but don't know about the ISA.
It's a good point. It might be actually quite good that it comes from somebody else as opposed to Ryan. I remember chatting to him about it before, and he was kind of, it's tricky being one person to critique. Yeah. So it actually might be a great way to do it. Hi.
Yeah. Yeah, Shane, if you're interested in a self-rescue resource, you can join the ISA's self-rescue working team. There hasn't been much development on that, but you can help guide where the conversation goes or put an effort to develop a way to do it, or to suggest people do it. Yeah, having like a social media campaign to have people do their own rescues and send in a video and do that'd be really cool, but we kind of need somebody to actually manage that. When Josh Stagg asks, when talking about when walking big lines, does having multiple people walking at once significantly increase risk? I don't know about any incident reports that say that, just like using common sense. Of course, if you have more people on the line, tension is going to be higher. There's more, variables to go wrong. So risk is probably increased. I don't know about significantly increasing because there's no real data on that right now. But I would certainly say the risk is increased. Whether or not it's acceptable is entirely subjective, right? Since there's no hard data about it. I do it, so it's not a risk that I'm unwilling to take, but of course it should be known that it's an unknown risk, really. Any other questions or comments, guys? I guess we can stop this presentation. That concludes my presentation discussion.